Welcome back to chapter number 17, Breathing and Exchange of Gases. In the last class, we have discussed about the respiratory organs. Today, we will discuss about the mechanism of breathing. What is thoracic chamber? Thoracic chamber, it is an anatomically an airtight chamber. The boundaries are formed by the vertebral column dorsally. Dorsally means piche, backward. In the back, it is formed by the boundary is formed by the vertebral column, and ventrally, that is in the front side, it is formed by the sternum, which is a flat bone on the chest, front side of the chest. Laterally, that is on the sides, it is formed by the ribs, and lower side, it is formed by the diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped muscular structure. Whenever there is change in the volume of thoracic cavity, there is change in the lung cavity. There is also change in the lung volume. And whenever we use the term pulmonary, it is pertaining to the lungs. Let's know the mechanism of breathing. This breathing involves two stages, inspiration and expiration. Inspiration means taking in the oxygen inside the lungs, and expiration is expulsion of air from the lungs into the atmosphere. We should know what is pressure gradient. This is pressure gradients means the pressure difference between the lungs and the atmosphere. That is the lungs and atmosphere में जब pressure difference होता है, suppose lungs में pressure ज़्यादा हो सकता है, उस समय pressure atmosphere का कम होगा, और atmosphere का जब कम ज़्यादा होगा तो lungs का कम होगा, तो that is the pressure difference को बोल रहे हैं. तो इस whenever there is a pressure gradient lungs and atmosphere में, then it leads to the inspiration and expiration. There is one term known as intrapulmonary pressure, that is the pressure which is inside the lungs, and atmospheric pressure, that is the pressure outside the body. So whenever there is a pressure difference in these two, there is inspiration or expiration. So let's know what is inspiration. During inspiration, the pressure inside the lungs or the intrapulmonary pressure is less as compared to the atmospheric pressure. The intrapulmonary pressure is less than the atmospheric pressure. So this leads to negative pressure inside the lungs. And during expiration, the intrapulmonary pressure is more than the atmospheric pressure. That is, the pressure inside the lungs is more than the pressure outside. That is the atmospheric pressure. There are structures which is involved in generation of this gradient. That is the difference in the pressure. उसको हम gradient कहते हैं. Diaphragm and the external and internal intercostal muscles. During inspiration, what happens? There is contraction of the diaphragm. As we know, diaphragm forms the boundary of the thoracic chamber in the lower part. So when the diaphragm contracts, जब ये contracts होता है, contraction means when the muscle fibers shorten, जब tight हो जाते हैं muscles, this diaphragm, तब क्या होता है कि the thoracic chamber का volume increase हो जाता है in the anteroposterior axis. Anteroposterior axis मतलब आगे से पीछे वाला जो एक्सिस है उसमें ये चैम्बर का वॉल्यूम बढ़ जाता है, बिकॉज ऑन कंट्रैक्शन डायफ्राम इज पुश्ड डाउनवर्ड. The second step is there is contraction of the external intercostal muscles, and during this contraction of these muscles, what it does, it will lift up the ribs and the sternum. As we know, the ribs form the lateral boundary of the thoracic cavity, and sternum the ventral or the front boundary of the thoracic chamber. So on contraction of this external intercostal muscles, it will lift the ribs and the sternum. जब ribs and sternum lift हो जाता है तो क्या होता है कि automatically the chamber का जो volume है, thoracic chamber का volume, it increases. So when there is contraction of the diaphragm and contraction of the external intercostal muscles, what happens is the intrapulmonary pressure, it increases. In the intrapulmonary volume increases. So when volume increases, when the space or the volume increases, pressure क्या हो जाता है, वहाँ पे pressure घट जाता है. So when the pressure inside the lungs is less, now the air moves into the lungs. That is inspiration. Now the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles which contracted during the inspiration, now during expiration what happens, it gets relaxation. During relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, there is decrease in the thoracic volume because it comes back to its normal position. Diaphragm, it relaxes and comes back to its normal position, the upward position. And the external intercostal muscles, what it does, it will come back, it will relax, and it will lead to the ribs and sternum coming back to its normal position. So there is decrease in the thoracic volume. When volume decreases, then this also leads to decrease in the pulmonary volume. And when the volume decreases inside the lungs, the pressure in the lungs increases, that is increase in the intrapulmonary pressure. When the pressure increases, it will expel, it will throw out the air that was in the lungs into the atmosphere. So this is the expiration. Now the muscles of the abdomen also takes part in this respiration. They increase the strength of inspiration and expiration. In a normal healthy individual, the respiratory rate is 12 to 16 breaths per minute. That means in 1 minute a person will breathe, and one breath means inspiration and expiration, that is 12 to 16 breaths per minute. What is spirometer? Spirometer is an instrument which is used to assess the pulmonary function, that is the volume of the lungs, or the volume of the air that is taking part in the respiration. So spirometer is that instrument. Now let us see some diagrams. This I have taken from the NCERT book. I have already explained you about the mechanism of breathing. So this is the pictorial representation. When during the inspiration, what happens? The diaphragm contracts. So there is contraction of the diaphragm. So when diaphragm contracts, it goes downward, and the external intercostal muscles contracts and pulls up the ribs and the sternum. So it goes outward. So in this process, what happens? The thoracic cavity increases in volume. When the volume increases, the pressure automatically decreases, and when the pressure decreases, the air flows from the high pressure zone to the low pressure zone. That means the air enters into the lungs. Now this is about the inspiration. During expiration, what happens? The diaphragm which was contracted during inspiration, it gets relaxed and it gets arched upwards. So it goes upwards, see? It goes upwards, and the ribs and the sternum, they return to its original position, where because the muscles, intercostal muscles, get relaxed. So it goes back into its normal position. In this process, the thoracic cavity, the volume of the thoracic cavity decreases. So when the volume decreases, space decreases, what happens? The pressure automatically increases. So now the pressure inside the lungs is more than the pressure outside, that is in the atmosphere. So in this condition, the air is expelled out from the lungs to the environment. Now this is another picture showing the muscles which takes part in inspiration and expiration. See the pulmonary, during inspiration, the sternocleidomastoid and scalene muscles, these are the muscles of the neck, they also take part. Then the external intercostal muscle, which is very important, you have to remember this muscle. It elevates the rib cage. The diaphragm, which is also a very important muscle, what happens during inspiration? It contracts and it goes downward and increases the thoracic volume. So primary muscle of respiration is diaphragm. During expiration, which are all the muscles taking part? That is the internal intercostal muscles. It depresses the rib cage. Rib cage goes back to its normal position. And also there are muscles of the abdomen like external oblique, rectus abdominis. They also take part during expiration. Then we have transverse abdominis and internal oblique. But most important is the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscle. So this is a diagram showing the lungs at rest during inspiration and during expiration. At rest, during inspiration and during expiration. At rest, what happens? See, the atmospheric pressure is 760 millimeter of mercury, and the pressure inside the lungs, that is the intrapulmonary pressure, is 760 millimeter of mercury. That means it is same. So this is the pressure at rest. During inspiration, as we have already discussed, the pressure inside decreases. So intrapulmonary pressure, which was 760 millimeter of mercury, now it becomes 758 millimeter of mercury during the inspiration. And when pressure decreases, the air enters from the atmosphere into the lungs. During expiration, what happens? The pressure inside the lungs increases because of the decrease in the volume of the thoracic cavity. Then the pressure, see, the pressure here is intrapulmonary pressure is 763. You can compare it with the pressure here during the rest. That is 760. That shows the pressure during the expiration is more inside the lungs during expiration, and this leads to expulsion of the air outside into the environment. Now let us see what is respiratory volumes and capacities. Tidal volume. This is the volume of air which is inspired or expired during normal respiration. जब normally, that means at rest, जब हम सांस लेते हैं तो जो सांस हम अंदर लेते हैं या बाहर फेंकते हैं, that is around 500 ml. This is known as the tidal volume. And in a healthy man, around 6,000 to 8,000 ml of air is required for inspiration or expiration per minute. Now, how did we get this 6,000 to 8,000? Because we know that the respiratory rate in a normal healthy individual is 12 to 16 breaths per minute. So we have taken the upper and the lower value of the respiratory rate, and we have multiplied it with 500 ml. So we get 6,000 to 8,000 ml of air per minute. Now, what is inspiratory reserve volume? Inspiratory reserve volume, it is the additional volume of air which is inspired by forcible inspiration. So in this, you have to remember the term additional. Additional. Inspiratory reserve volume, that is the additional volume of air inspired by forcible inspiration, which is 2,500 to 3,000 ml. Expiratory reserve volume, this is the additional volume of air which is expired by forcible expiration, and it is 100 ml to 1,100 ml. Now residual volume, from the term itself we are able to make out that this is the residual, that is the residue leftover, the volume of air remaining after forcible expiration. जब हम जोर से सांस लेते हैं forcefully, जब सांस बाहर फेंकते हैं तो जितना हवा अंदर रहता है उसको we call it residual volume, that is 1,100 ml to 1,200 ml. Now pulmonary capacity. What is pulmonary capacity? We know about tidal volume, the inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, residual volume. Out from this volume we get the pulmonary capacity. Now, what is inspiratory capacity? It is the total volume of air which is inspired after normal expiration. That is, जब हम normally सांस बाहर फेंकते हैं, normal, that is not forcibly, but in a normal state, जब हम सांस बाहर फेंकते हैं, उसके बाद जो सांस जितना हम अंदर लेते हैं, that is inspiratory capacity. And this we can derive by, or we get by adding the tidal volume and the expiratory reserve volume. Second is expiratory capacity. This is the total volume of air which is expired after normal inspiration. That means जब normally सांस लेते हैं अंदर, उसके बाद जितना जो volume of air हम बाहर फेंकते हैं उसे बोलते हैं expiratory capacity. And this we get after adding the tidal volume and the expiratory reserve volume. Third is the vital capacity. That is the maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after forced expiration. or it is the maximum volume of air a person can breathe out after a forced inspiration. The vital capacity, you can just imagine whatever terms I am using and the capacity that I am talking about, you have to imagine it. Only when you imagine it, then you are able to keep it in your mind. So maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after forced expiration. जोर से फोर्सिबली जब हम सांस बाहर फेंकते हैं, उसके बाद जितना एयर हम अंदर ले सकते हैं उससे बोलते हैं वाइटल कैपेसिटी. और जितना मैक्सिमम वॉल्यूम ऑफ एयर जो हम बाहर फेंक सकते हैं अगर जोर से सांस अंदर लेने के बाद, तो वी कॉल इट वाइटल कैपेसिटी. एंड दिस वी गेट बाय एडिंग द एक्सपिरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम plus tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. Fourth is the total lung capacity. This is the total volume of air accommodated at the end of the forced inspiration. That is, जब जोर से सांस लेते हैं अंदर, when we take the inspiration forcefully, जब हम जोर से सांस अंदर लेते हैं तो जितना एयर अंदर रहता है accommodate हो चुका है उसे बोलते हैं total lung capacity और TLC. This we get by adding the respiratory volume plus the expiratory reserve volume plus the tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume, or we can add the vital capacity and the residual volume. So today we have finished the second subtopic of the chapter, that is the mechanism of breathing. Thank you.